The Deep Web, where dubious individuals go to play. I hope you're comfortable. Things are going to get dark with these 4 allegedly true Deep Web stories. Number 1. This story is 100% true, and is about an experience I had going on the Deep Web. For those of you who don't know, the Deep Web is pretty much the hidden internet. It isn't indexed by search engines, and you require special software to manage to access it. It is also the home to many illegal things. You can purchase stolen guns, any drug that you imagine, stolen phones, and you can even hire hitmen. Basically, anything illegal can be obtained on the Deep Web. Were you really surprised it existed? I never had a great childhood. My dad was always gone, and my mum wasn't around that much either. When she was, it was normally verbal or physical abuse, and I always needed a way to escape it all, whether it be playing video games, watching movies, or even drinking. One day, I was invited over to a friend's house for a sleepover. I arrived and greeted his family, and then went upstairs to see him. When I got to his room, he told me that he had something to show me. He opened his laptop, and he told me that he'd managed to get onto the Deep Web. We stayed up very late that night, browsing through all the interesting things we could find. He showed me how to use it, and I took down some notes so that the next day I could try it out for myself. And that is exactly what I did. I downloaded the software and was good to go. When on the Deep Web, there is a page full of links in order for you to get to sites. You keep clicking the new link that pops up. At first it was very boring. Hundreds of dead websites, or disgusting ones, filled with videos of real people being butchered alive. Eventually I found a forum. I can't remember what it was about. I asked how to go to interesting sites that were not illegal. One guy then sent me a link and said that it was a site that contained leaked government documents. That's when I thought things were getting interesting. So I clicked on it without a second thought. But when the page opened, I was shocked. It was a bunch of videos of people being tortured, raped, or murdered in the most horrific ways. I have a pretty strong stomach, so I was ready to ignore and just exit out. But that's when I realized all the videos were playing at once. When I moved the mouse over one to pause, there was nothing. No bar that let you pause nor stop it. And that's when it hit me. These were all live stream. I clicked on one that said homeless man kidnapped in my basement. It was a man who was tied to a chair and covered in blood. To his left was a table, and on it was a whole bunch of tools, like axes, knives, drills and hammers. It was quite clear he'd already been pretty badly battered in. And there was a hooded person standing by the table. On the right of the live stream, there was a chat box, and people were requesting that the hooded man to do various things, like cut off the homeless man's hands, or rip out his hair. Eventually, one man in the chat box said that he would pay several bitcoins for the hooded man to gorge out the homeless man's eyes. The hooded man obliged, and grabbed what looked like a fork off the table, and began to walk towards the homeless man. I was absolutely in shock. I quickly closed down the live stream, but I could still hear it. I could hear the screams of this poor man. I tried to leave the site, but it was frozen, and I could only hear the horrible, horrible screams. A few seconds later, the sound thankfully stopped, and a chat box appeared in the center of my screen. I couldn't exit out of it, but then in the box someone typed in, "Hello, how did you like the site?" I paused for a moment, not sure if it was some kind of automated message. But then he typed again, "Are you going to answer?" I stayed frozen in place, but eventually typed in, "Who is this?" The guy explained that he was the owner of the site, and that he liked to greet first-time users whenever he could. I winced in disgust, and this is where things got really scary. In the chat box, the man typed, "It's really rude to make faces, Jake." And that's when my eyes got wide. I noticed that my webcam was on. I always keep it off. How did this man know my name, and how did he manage to turn on my cam? I covered up the webcam with a sticky note and typed, "How did you know my name? I'm calling the police." But there was a brief pause, and then, horrifyingly, a whole bunch of data was posted in the box. I looked at it, and I realized it was everything about me. My full name, my email, my address, my age, and it even had my parents' information as well. I panicked and shut off my computer, and hoped that that would be the end of that. I did a complete wipe of my computer's data and went out for a drink. I was under a lot of stress. That night, my mum said that she wouldn't be home. She didn't say where she was, but at this point in my life I couldn't care less. My dad, of course, was nowhere to be seen, probably still out on business. I couldn't sleep, so I stayed up watching a movie and fell asleep on the couch, agitated and worried. I don't know why, but around 2:30 in the morning I woke up. The TV was still on, and it gave off a dim light. But when I opened my eyes a little more, I almost screamed. There was a man standing just a few feet away from me. He was wearing a mask, and I flew off the couch and darted for the door. I heard heavy footsteps coming after me, so I flung the door open and ran outside screaming as loud as I could to try and get someone's attention. I looked behind me and I saw the man. He was running, and he was a lot faster than me. I screamed even louder and noticed that there were tears running down my face. Then, a bag wrapped around my head, and I was pushed to the ground hard. I was pushed to the ground so hard that I felt blood in my mouth. I heard a car speed up beside me, and I was being dragged to the sound of it. They were taking me away, and presumably were going to put me on that site. I almost accepted my death when the man with the mask screamed in pain and dropped me. I pulled the bag off my head and saw the van speed away. That's when I saw my neighbour hitting the masked man repeatedly with a baseball bat. It wasn't before long that the police arrived. They took the masked man away and eventually caught the van. The site was shut down. My mum, dad and I eventually moved away, and I will never, ever go back on the deep web. Number 2. This was back before Google. Web pages were, for the most part, still very basic HTML with JavaScript. Hardly anyone used CSS. Only discussion boards and some banking sites had anything approaching mature front-end back-end combinations. Early net, real, deep web stories, not just one about illicit activities online. I was browsing random blogs, GeoCity sites and stuff like that, just going from link to link. Eventually, I came upon an odd page. It just appeared to be random thoughts from different people, but for the time, it was very well designed. The messages seemed cryptic in nature, like several people were trying to pass secret notes. I started through the source, and hidden in the comments of the JavaScript were various IP addresses. I gathered all of the IPs in a text file and began enumerating. Some were routers with banner images which I could telnet to, almost all at universities. The default Cisco credentials from back in the day worked on most of them, but I didn't bother poking around. A few of the IPs were web servers, with little to nothing on them. Most Apache or Linux, some BDS, and at least one IIS server. I finally came upon a web server with a huge directory of HTML files and TIFF files, with a few smaller subdirectories containing the same. NSLOOKUP returned no reverse results from the IP, and a visual router traced it as far as Colorado. The HTML files appeared to be records of a psychologist or a similar mental health professional. The images were of faxes, apparently of both military and medical nature. As I browsed from a subdirectory back to the parent, I noticed that they had just added an HTML file entitled 1. Hello there. This timestamp was from right now. Right that minute. I opened it in plain text, and the message was, "We see you." About 15 seconds later, the server dropped. Number 3. Hello. I'm 26 years old. I have blonde hair, blue eyes, and I'm a normal kind of girl. I know it seems pointless to say this now, but I promise it's important information, and it will mean a lot later in this message. It's hard to decide where to start, so I'll run you from the beginning, I suppose. 2 weeks ago, I was out on my daily run in the morning before work. There was fog in the air. I remember this distinctly because it was so thick that it actually made it hard to see about 10 meters in front of you. But still, I needed to go jogging. And then all of a sudden, a dark red SUV started to become visible through the heavy fog. I don't know what happened here, as it was all so fast. 1 minute I was running my normal route, and the next I was grabbed and thrown into the SUV. I suppose they used chloroform or something to knock me out, because when I came back to it, I was in a solid white room. Absolutely nothing in it but me. I don't know what's worse, realizing that I had been kidnapped, or the maddening essence of the dead and empty room I was being kept in. For 2 days I saw and heard no one. The sheer whiteness of this room was driving me insane. Minus the screams, of course, and pleas, and downright pitiful begs that escaped my mouth. Finally they came, but it was no blessing. I was taken to yet another white room, but this time there were things in it. I was stripped down to nothing and washed like a dog with a cold hose. There were 3 men and 1 woman in the room. She just sat back and observed, writing things down in a small notebook. The men heckled me, tossed me around between them, and they touched me. But blessedly, the woman spoke up before it went any further. She had a very thick German accent, and I remember she told them to wait, as she didn't want to spoil me. I wasn't sure what she meant, started to get really worried and was taken to yet another solid white room. But this one was not empty. There was a chair in the centre screwed to the floor, an empty box about the size of a coffee pot, and a metal swivel table covered in a white cloth. Here I was plopped into the chair, my wrists and ankles tightly bound with heavy metal lashes. I was terrified. I asked them what they were going to do to me, but no one spoke a word as they went about their tasks. I felt like an object to them, not a human. Everyone left, and once again I was alone. A whirring noise brought me out of the panic attack I was about to go into. I watched in horror as an extra-large television descended from above me. It could have been the biggest I've ever seen, and it settled in against the wall directly in front. The screen flickered on, and a man dressed like a 50s butcher and a woman dressed like an old-style nurse came in and uncovered the metal table. They revealed a plethora of small tools, a scalpel, and several other types of medical equipment, dental tools, and other things like that which I really didn't recognize. I've never been so afraid in my life. My hell, though, truly began when people's faces started popping up on the screen. The butcher asked the nurse if everything was in order, and she nodded and said in a German accent, "Yes, doctor, everyone has paid." He smiled and thanked the group of 6 on the screen. My body trembled beyond control. The nurse then looked at the screen. "What is your first request?" she asked the panel. The first person in the line of the screen said, "Bite her nipple hard, then peel it off nice and slow." This is where I began screaming. They attempted to put a ball gag in my mouth, but the man on the screen stated, "Let her scream." The nurse walked behind me, grabbed my breasts hard, and sticking them out as far as she could. The butcher then leaned down and bit the right one. White hot pain seared through my body. Just as the man wanted, I screamed in agony. The nurse, which I heard the butcher call Olga, brought a long, thin pair of strangely shaped tongs and a scalpel. The butcher took the scalpel, leaving the nurse with the tongs, and she grabbed my nipple and pulled it out as far as she could. So far I thought she might rip it off. Then the butcher stepped forward and began to slice through my tender breast. I screamed and screamed, but my captors didn't even react. I tried struggling, but it only made things worse. In a matter of just a few minutes, as the butcher took his sweet time, I was left with no nipple on my right breast. I could feel the warm blood pouring into my stomach and pooling underneath me. The nurse and butcher looked expectantly at the screen, awaiting their next order. I stole a glance at the man currently commanding my torture. He was just a normal guy. They all were. Only one of the 6 men looked slightly uncomfortable. They wore suits and ties and looked like professionals, each appearing to have just stepped out of the office. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was not sure what to expect, but not suit and tie office wearing people. My heart sank. If these guys were capable of this, then anyone was. Struggling against my restraints, determined not to suffer any longer, I cried and cursed at the men behind the damned television screen. I cursed the butcher and the nurse, and I continued my triad until I heard one of the men's voices say, "Undo her and beat her against the walls." I looked back up in shock. Was there no end to this cruelty? Quickly, the nurse moved the cart of horror toys out the room and returned to my side. Together they removed my shackles and I was free. I bolted for the door, but was yanked backwards from my hair hard. Again I screamed in pain, which seemed to please everyone even more. Before I could even fall, the butcher swung me around, still holding my hair, and slammed me into the opposite wall. I hit it hard enough to knock the wind out of my lungs. And again, before I was even able to think of what I was to do, I was slammed into another wall, and then another, and another, until the man with the request said that it was enough. The butcher grabbed me by my upper arm and forced me to the front of the screen. I had never felt so exposed. Blood dripping from my face and breast. I was so vulnerable and felt so small. The smallest and weakest I'd ever felt in my whole life. I prayed that they were done. But the nurse stepped forward and said, "You have 7 minutes of paytime remaining. What will your final wish for our little beauty here be?" There was a silence for a moment, as the men seemed to be deciding what they wanted for the finale. But the request was nothing I braced for. Rape her. I was floored. I begged and pleaded that they change their minds to the butcher to please no, but my words fell on deaf ears, and the butcher seemed determined to oblige, as I heard the sound of his leather apron hit the floor and his belt come undone. He still had me by my arm. I struggled with all my might to get away, but I was jarred when the hulk of a man turned and backhanded me right across my face. I nearly fell, and he used this to his advantage, throwing me the rest of the way to the ground, positioning me so that the men could see everything from a sideways view. "Make it rough," one of the men called. The butcher clawed over the top of me and smiled. "With pleasure," he said, wrapping one large, beefy hand around my throat and pushing me down. By the time he was finished with me, my screams had diminished to pathetic-sounding sniffles and begs. I just wanted this torture to be over. I wanted them to kill me. I wanted this moment to end. I mean, surely that would be their last request. I was shocked to hear them say that they wanted me alive for another time, and that they would likely be back. The man lifted me to the ground and licked my ear, and then whispered, "Looks like it's your lucky night, hey sweetheart?" I was far too exhausted from the pain and shame to fight back. I just let them take me, praying that it would end the torture. Unfortunately, I was immediately shoved back into my little white room and left there until they decided that if I put this information out on the net, it would attract more customers. Please stop watching these videos. Please stop visiting the deep web. This isn't a joke. It's people's lives, and they shouldn't be destroyed or tortured or killed for the amusement of others. I already know that I won't leave this place alive or intact, but that doesn't matter. Maybe I can save someone else from this fate. Maybe you. Number 4. When I was underage, 14 to be exact, I started to learn and find out about the deep web. It started out as me being cool, because I was able to access it and show my friends. And also, I got to look at the price of drugs from different websites. Anyhow, that's how I discovered the CP network. Well, as a horny teenager, I started visiting the chat rooms pretty often. I didn't say much, just watched pedos talk about different things. Sometimes, there would be link dumps of hundreds of different CP sites. I tried to resist from it, knowing that child pornography was wrong, But I didn't hold out long with my tendencies. I started visiting the rooms more often and getting to know more of the people on there. Hell, I even started talking to a few. I can't remember when, but one day I was talking to a guy and he asked me how old I was. I don't know why I didn't lie and say I was 49 or something, but I said 15. Well, he happened to have an interest in me. We spoke more, and that's when I realized that I had a fetish for being handled by older men. I ended up sending a few pics to him, and he got off for the night. A few more people messaged me the next night, and the next, and so on. I probably sent hundreds of pics and some videos of me using a shitty webcam I had. I talked to some of the darkest and most hated people on the earth and didn't think twice about it. It all came to an abrupt end when my PC died, and I had to wait a couple of months to get a new one. I'd thought a lot about it and decided it wouldn't be best for me to keep doing it, and so when I got my new machine, I didn't install the next update of the deep web browser. I have never been able to tell anyone this due to its nature, but it feels good to finally get it off my chest. Hey guys, this is just a bit of a bonus story. It's one I found a bit funny. Let me know what you think in the comments below. This was back when SR1 was still strong. I was looking for a certain substance but couldn't find it on my part of the world for a decent price. I posted a request on a deep web forum, and after a few days, someone messaged me with an offer. For some reason, I accepted it and sent him about $200, and of course, I got scammed. I didn't think much of it, but posted a warning to others about this guy, saying he scammed me out of $200. A few days later, I got a message in my inbox saying something like this: "Hey, I'm a vendor, and this guy tried to scam me too. He just ordered an ounce of MDMA from me, and an ounce of sweet sugar crystals are on the way to his mailbox. Please send me your BTC address, and I will send you the $200 he scammed you out of." The very next day, I had my $200 back and a deep respect for the deep web community.